Welcome to another edition of the Public Interest. My name is David Granger, and on this series of programs, we examine matters that concern all Guyanese, both in the diaspora and at home. And what is most important at this point in time, and what is also very topical, is the question of race relations. And as you know, the APNU AFC coalition in the first year that is in office in 2015 had created a special minister's office to deal with social cohesion, to deal with race relations. But right now, if you look at the newspapers, there have been recent and there are frequent reports and references to what takes place at Babu Jan. Some people say John, but it's really Jan, Jan, at Port Morant and the East Pepys Quarantine region. And within the context of race relations and in the context of race relations, what is being said year after year at Babu Jan has made people feel that race relations are deteriorating and that social cohesion is being damaged, hopefully not irreparably, but they're being damaged by some loose remarks at Babu Jan. As you know, there's a ceremony every year in March to commemorate the death of President Chelly Jagan, and also later on his wife died. So it's a single ceremony for two Guyanese presidents, very, very unique. Um, but instead of being a reverent commemoration of the lives of two presidents, it has degenerated into a political rally. And unfortunately, the worst type of political rally, it's degenerated into a cuss out. And when elections are close, for example, in 2011 and 2015, the cuss out becomes more extreme. Um, these rants, I call them a rant, maybe that four-letter word is better. I don't want to go into other descriptions of what happens around and so on. But these rants at Babu Jan have aggravated ethnic tension, and they have eroded social cohesion, and they provoked public revulsion from the time they started in March 2011. Now, you know what happened in March 2011? It was the month after I was elected by a special PNC Congress to become the PNC presidential candidate. So the first major cuss out was against me a month after the PNC selected me. So we can go all the way back to the Babu Jan rants to March 2011 when David Granger became presidential candidate. And we must examine what has been said over the years at Babu Jan in light of UNESCO Declaration on Race and Race Prejudice. That is to say, that racism includes ideologies, racist ideologies, prejudice attitudes, discriminatory behavior, structural arrangements, and institutionalized practices resulting in racial inequality. Such behavior divides nations internally and also generates tensions among the people living in that country. The Babu Jan rants could also be explained by the United Nations definition of verbal violence, which is language about and towards other people, which is discriminatory, biased, bigoted, or intolerant, or pejorative. In other words, it is prejudiced, contemptuous, or demeaning. You can judge for yourselves. Look at what UNESCO had declared since 1978, and look at what the United Nations has declared. And you judge for yourself whether the rants that you've been hearing and reading about at Babujan are prejudicial, are contemptuous, or demeaning. Read about them because you'll hear about them year after year. And I think next year you'll probably hear about them again. And the Guyanese are becoming fed up. Guyanese are becoming fed up. The Babujan rants were so disgusting that they were cause for public indignation. Police investigation. I think this is the first time the CID actually had to investigate a former president. And there's been private litigation. So there's been not only indignation, but there's been litigation and investigation because the words were very serious, very heavy. For example, accusations that the leader of the opposition had blood on his hands. That's how it started off in March 2011. Accusations that the army would join forces with the then opposition to kick down doors. You heard that? The army would join forces with the then opposition to kick down doors. That Afro Guyanese would beat drums at 6 o'clock in the villages and say throughout these Kuli people, my friends, there are 250,000 Afro Guyanese. Most of them live in villages. Are these words typical of Afro Guyanese or village life? But that is what was said at Babujan. And these reports, although they are fictitious and malicious, they should never have been uttered in the first place. And they are harmful. That's the problem. It's not a joke. They cause hurt and they cause harm. And at these Babujan ceremonies, residents are being told to chase the president and prime minister out of the region. These comments stigmatize not only a government but also a political party. How can a whole party be racist? And some of these comments at Babujan stigmatize an entire political party, a coalition which is capable of winning, at least by some accounts, 280,000 votes. How could the entire coalition be racist and win 218,000 votes? My friends, and the rants go on. There's bragging that the PPP will work to control every village, including Afro-Guyanese villages. There's no promise to improve the quality of life. There's no promise to get children in school. There's no promise to bring prosperity. There's just a promise to capture every African Guyanese village. These are not my words. This is what is taking place at Babujan. And I think these rants go beyond the boundary of everyday political rivalry. They go beyond what you expect in respectful relationships in a country like ours. And they venture into a sphere of hatred and hostility. And that hatred and hostility could degenerate into violence. My friends, we all know East Babi's current team. We know that the PPC always wins an electoral advantage there. And at Babujan, it's a party function. It's a receptive audience. You could almost say it's a captive audience. And to use that platform to disparage the enemies or the adversaries of the PPP instead of defending the legacies of the jacket is a travesty. It's a sacrilege. You're aiming at disparaging the PNC and the APNU rather than defending the legacy of the Dragons, which is what the ceremony should be all about. A huge section of the Guyanese population is being demeaned, and in this way, hostility is being incited against other people by some people. The Babu Jan functions and ceremonies and the ranting promote disdain and disrespect for other people. Actions, attitudes, and behavior, beliefs, and speech that can be justified, cannot be justified by political rivalry to supporters. But those actions and those words have now become pervasive, and they're damaging social cohesion. They're damaging our country. These targeted attacks inevitably will provoke disaffection and discrimination against particular parties, against particular persons, because in my case, my name was called, and against huge sections of the Guyanese population. The Babu Jan rants run the risk of steering race relations away from cooperation into a different realm, away from what was understood to be ordinary political rivalry, into making Guyanese society unbalanced and unsettled. The rants have been used to criticize other party leaders. Fair enough. But even former PPP executives have come out to criticize the rants, and members of civil society have come out to criticize these Babu Jan rants. The rants undermine social stability, and they damage social cohesion, and they create unprecedented problems for Guyanese society. And when you see what is taking place on the street, the abuse and assault of school children that we saw in March 2020, that we saw in February 2023, the protests that we saw in East Demerara and in Essequibo, in Pomeroon, Supernam, all of these protests have arisen because of the toxic atmosphere created by the rants at Babu Jan. Babu Jan is not being used to bring people together. It is being used to drive people further apart. And we will all suffer because of that. Yes, as usual, there's legislation. There's the Racial Hostilities Act, which makes it a criminal offense to incite hostility against persons on the basis of race. And then you have the Ethnic Relations Tribunal Act, which provides for the establishment of the ERC, which is intended, among other things, to promote good relations and harmony, peace and tolerance, and to provide an equal opportunity between persons of different ethnic groups, and to prevent ethnic prejudice. But the ethnic relation cannot police itself. The Racial Hostilities Act cannot police itself. We need the cooperation of people who go to a place like Babu Jan and tear off, attack other people in the most vulgar fashion, a fashion that I referred to some years ago as vulgarian. That is all you can say about what takes place there. And the ERC abides by the Constitution. And from the start of this series of rants in 2011, ERC said the rants were dangerous and unnecessary precedent. These are not my words. These are the words of the Ethnic Relations Commission. It deemed the rants, especially when they referred to the PNCR's presidential candidate in 2011, as dangerous and unnecessary. When he spoke, or when the rant spoke of the PNC candidate having blood on his hands, even though it was pointed out that in my case, as of July 16th, 1973, I was at Temeri, Atkinson Field, yet this comment was never withdrawn. And the ERC said that the rants contravened the Representation of the People Amendment Act and the Racial Hostilities Act, which make it a criminal offense to be involved in making or publishing any statement or taking any action which can result in racial or ethnic violence or hatred. My friends, the question of what takes place at Babujan affects all of us. It is not a private ceremony, it is a public ceremony. Every year, except during the period of COVID, every year we hear the voices of Babujan renewing allegations and taking actions which alienate ordinary people, reasonable people, right thinking people. They erode cooperation and they help to make Guyanese society more unequal. I wish to propose a few measures which could be taken to guide the people who are called upon to address this nation at Babujan. Because even though it's a PPP political function, the nation listens because usually the head of state or the general secretary of that party would speak at that function at Babujan. My first recommendation is that our children, our children must not learn hatred from that ceremony at Babujan. Our children must learn respect for each other. And there must be education teaching our children that we are all one nation and that we have a common future and we've come from a common past in the plantations as enslaved Africans or indentured Indians or even as marginalized Amerindians. We have a common heritage of oppression from other people, and we have a common future together, a future that must be premised on liberty and dignity. So education is my first recommendation. And this education must start at Babujan. It must start in the home and the church, in the mandir and the masjid. But Babujan must become a platform for cooperation, not a platform for confrontation. Second, there must be inclusionary democratic measures, the implementation of inclusionary democratic measures. Everything possible must be done to use Babujan to bring our people together, not to drive them further apart, and to talk about capturing Africa, African Guyanese villages. That's not what Babujan is about. Babujan should be about cohesion and cooperation. My third recommendation is about integration of social cohesion teaching, social cohesion doctrine in the mainstream of state policy. Social cohesion is not a sideshow, it's not an afterthought. It is central to who we are as Guyanese and where this country is going to go. Whether we're going to tear apart tear ourselves apart in division, or whether we'll come together in cohesion. My fourth recommendation to the Babu Jan warriors is the enforcement of laws to suppress racial hostility and verbal violence. This is a function of the police, yes. It's a function of the ERC, yes. But it's also a function of leaders who feel that they have an obligation to the entire nation to bring people together, should not use Babu Jan as a platform to divide the nation. And finally, my fifth recommendation, if you wish, you can you can think of other things that can be done at Babu Jan. But these are my five recommendations. Is the eradication of extreme inequality everywhere, not only in Currentine, East Babis Currentine, not only in the coastline, but also in the hinterland, not only in this corridor or that corridor. But the eradication of extreme poverty should take place countrywide. So these are my five recommendations for what Babu Jan should be all about. Babu Jan should be about education. It should be about implementation of inclusionary democratic measures. It should be about the integration of social cohesion measures as a mainstream of government policy. It should be about the enforcement of laws to suppress racial hostility. And it should be about the eradication of extreme inequality everywhere in Guyana. My friends, Babu Jan is not a circus, and it's not meant to be an arena for clowns to perform. And we don't want clownishness at Babu Jan anymore. Racial utterances are like a gangrene eating away at the flesh of this nation. They're eating away at the fabric and the fiber of society. That's what racism is doing to us. And we should bear in mind, all of us, whether we are members of the PNC or PPP or AFC or ANOG, all Guyanese should bear in mind the words and the sentiments of the daughter of those two presidents whose death anniversaries are commemorated at Babu Jan every March. And that woman spoke very respectfully as the daughter of two presidents should speak. And let me paraphrase, I don't want to be accused of misquoting her. She referred to the fact that many of the leaders of the PPPC party and government lack her parents' very, very, very high moral standards. Those 6 words came from the mouth of the daughter of two presidents. They lack the very, very high moral standards of her parents. That should have been a warning that the Babu Jan rants have already gone too far. The Babu Jan rants have been hurtful. They hamper and they do not help social cohesion. Guyana does not deserve those Babu Jan rants. We owe it to our children to pay attention to what the daughter of those two presidents said. Let us use Babu Jan as a place for cooperation and collaboration, not a place for confrontation and hatred. Thank you, and may God bless you.
Let us cooperate for the end. Each man must do his